This week apparently has been Barbie week. I didn't anticipate this being Barbie week. I really didn't anticipate it being Barbie week at all. If you had asked me last week at this time, Carlin, are you going to go see Barbie? I'd been like, fuck no. Like, why would I go see Barbie? And yet, I just got back from the movie theater, a little matinee. I have not actually been to a movie theater in a really long time. When was the last time I was in a movie theater? I'm pretty sure the last time I was in a movie theater was in Virginia in late 2020. So it has been at least 2.5 years since I have gone to a movie theater. And that streak ended today when I went to a matinee showing of Barbie. Now, I've been pontificating about how there is no way in this universe that Barbie is woke. There is no way. The Daily Wire people, Ben Shapiro came out with a 45-minute rant about Barbie being woke. Matt Walsh has it as like a the ultimate feminist propaganda movie, and we're going to watch that today and we'll see how that goes. But the thing of it is I didn't even need to see this movie to know that it was woke, or was not woke, rather. Oh, God, slip there. That's going to come, like, someone's going to edit that out of context. I didn't even need to see this movie to know that it was not woke. And we kind of discussed some of the reasons the other day on the channel, but to be honest, I was in a little bit of a pissy mood. And so maybe I could have articulated those points better. And so we'll discuss some of those points again today. However, I always do believe in making sure. And if I'm going to spend days on the internet talking about Barbie, then I might as well actually go see the dang movie. And I did. And I have some things to say about it, Ben Shapiro. I got to tell you, I am really, 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 really disappointed in the conservative right. And I think the reason that I'm really disappointed, it's like one of those things where, like, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. I thought we were all better than this. I thought we understood. I thought that we had a better grasp of what was going on in the world. There was a time a couple years ago during 2020 when there was a study that came out. And basically, and I don't know if it came out in 2020 or it was just being talked about a lot in 2020, but it was definitely being talked about a lot in 2020, where this study came out, and basically it said that the political left does not understand the political right. The political left doesn't listen to the political right. They can't make predictions about the political right. They can't do anything. But the political right does understand the political left, and they can make predictions about what the political left is going to do at any damn time. That study may have been accurate a couple of years ago. That study's no longer accurate. I'm sorry. We have descended into the realm of absolute crazy town. If the political conservative right actually believes that Barbie is woke, there is nothing about this movie that could be considered woke if you are actually watching the movie for what it is, which is a satire, which is meant to be nostalgic and reminiscent about how young girls and their gay best friends, but mostly young girls, play with Barbies, and how that is, and the joy that Barbies bring to the lives of young girls. Like, that's what this movie was. This was a movie about nostalgia. This was a movie about, evoking those deeply emotional moments you have when you're kids and you're just playing with all your toys. And yes, young girls ignored Ken, okay? Okay? Because the point wasn't fucking Ken. And men can get pissed off all they want about how Ken was ignored and abused and a poor victim of the world, but the reality is that when you were a young girl, and I don't know if this still happens today, but this was my experience, and yes, I played with Barbies growing up, all right. My favorite Barbie was the one with the really long hair. And the hair was special, so the hair was supposed to, like, when you did a hairstyle on it, it was supposed to, like, stay, and it didn't really work, but, like, it stayed better than, like, normal Barbie hair. Anyway, I played with Barbies too, and I know how this works. And I'll tell you what, no one cared about Ken. Okay, Ken dolls were a thing, they were around, but when young girls are playing with other young girls and they all have their Barbies, it is goddamn girl time. It is not time for men. Ken is an accessory in the land of Barbie. And Ken was also an accessory in the movie. And that is because the movie is supposed to. I don't know how to explain this to people who didn't play with Barbies growing up. The entire movie, the from everything from, like, when you first get shown around Barbie Land, to when Barbie goes into the real world, to when Barbie brings real world people back into Barbie Land and the Kens have taken over and there is a war for Barbie Land. Every single part of that movie was reminiscent of how young girls played with Barbie. That's what that was. This was a movie made for women who grew up playing Barbie. This was not a movie that was made for men who did not grow up playing Barbie. And if you ever and don't tell me that young girls are somehow playing with Barbie wrong, because there's no such thing. And Heidi, I agree. And I was thinking about this on my drive home. It is mind-boggling to me that this needs to be explained to people. It really is. This entire movie was a make-believe movie. This, like, do you guys understand that, like, when you're young, girls versus boys is like a thing, right? It is. And so when you have the Kens versus the Barbies, that is a classic boy girl, like, childhood game that is played. When you have the big war of the Barbies and the Kens, that is what happens when you have a whole bunch of Barbie dolls and a whole bunch of G.I. Joes or Ken or whatever the hell, and maybe you even had the big G.I. Joes, because the bigger G.I. Joes, like the normal size G.I. Joes, came out when I was a kid, and so there were not only Ken dolls running around, there were also these normal size G.I. Joes, and you play with all of them at the same time, and sometimes you make believe up a scenario where it's boys versus girls. This entire movie was make believe. It was meant to evoke nostalgia. I'm going to tell you this too. It did evoke nostalgia. I cried twice. I did. I admit it. I cried twice during this movie because, like, there were just some parts that were so on the nose that I was like, were you at my cousin's house growing up when we were all playing Barbies? Because I'm starting to feel like I'm having a moment, a tear stream down my cheek. I swear to God. This was a movie about creativity and imagination. This was not a movie about the patriarchy. And I'll tell you what, at the end of the movie, Ben Shapiro magically left this out of his little review. At the end of the movie, the woman who created Barbie, who is now guiding Barbie into the real world, she flat out says the patriarchy is a made up concept. That is in the movie. So all these people, all these conservatives who are screaming and crying, the movie said the word patriarchy. Conservatives are so triggered by the word patriarchy, simply by the word patriarchy, that they don't listen to everything else that is around the word patriarchy because they were mocking the idea of the existence of a patriarchy. And Ben Shapiro in his review wanted to be like, well, it was so easy for the men to come in and take over the world. Do you know why Ken went I'm going to be giving away plot lines in this movie, but it will not ruin the movie for you if you haven't seen it, to be honest, because the whole point of the movie is to make you feel that emotional feeling of when you were playing with Barbies, and you should all go. If you played with Barbies as a kid, you should go. Even if you don't want to admit you played with Barbies as a kid, you should go because it's fucking great. Do you know why Ken had to go back to Barbie Land to take over Barbie Land? Because, okay, so here's what happened. Barbie Land is a matriarchy, okay? The women control everything in Barbie Land because when you are a young girl and you are playing with Barbie, the point is to play with Barbies. All right? So, of course, in Barbie Land, the Barbies are going to rule Barbie Land because that is the entire point of playing with Barbies as a young girl, is that Barbie is every girl and every girl wants to be Barbie, and there's a Barbie for everyone. And you can dress up your Barbie, you can do this with that Barbie, you can do that with Barbie. Ken was an accessory to Barbie. Ken was not the point. So, what happens in the movie is Barbie has to go to the real world. And Ken has no identity without Barbie. Ken is obviously in love with Barbie. He follows Barbie everywhere. He wants Barbie to be in love with him. Is actually something really endearing about it. Ken doesn't understand who he is without Barbie, right? So when Barbie goes to the real world, Ken basically goes with her, but not by her choice. He kind of he snuck his way into the car and announced when they were already on their way to the real world, and Barbie said, "Fine, you can come to the real world with me." Fine. So they get into the real world. And Ken starts to realize that he as a man is a lot more quote unquote respected in the real world than he was in Barbie Land. Okay? And he kind of likes this. He's like, this woman asked me the time and she called me sir. And he kind of likes this. He's like, and it's basically a contrast of Barbie didn't pay attention to Ken. Well, now some people are paying attention to Ken. And then Ken goes and finds a book about the patriarchy. But the ironic thing is that Ken doesn't really care about the patriarchy. Ken cares about horses. I don't really understand the horse stuff. Did Ken I don't understand the horse references. Maybe I didn't have a Ken doll. My cousin had a Ken doll. I didn't really care about Ken. I don't know if there's a horse thing around Ken. I don't know. But Ken is obsessed with horses. But at some point, he also gets a book that explains the patriarchy to him. And then, and he thinks this is this big epiphany. He's like, men rule the world. I can do anything I want here simply by being a man. And then what Ken does is Ken tries to go and get a job. Ken goes to try to get a job at a big time corporation. He just walks into a company. He's like, can you give me some high level do nothing job that pays me lots of money? And they're like, no, you need an MBA for that. And then Ken tries to go to the hospital to be a doctor. And he walks in. He's like, will you hire me as a doctor to do a surgery? And the woman doctor that he's talking to is like, no, because you're not a doctor. We're not going to hire you. So what I'm saying here is that Ken discovered the patriarchy, literally tried to take advantage of the patriarchy that conservatives are all wound up about. Ken tries to take advantage of the patriarchy in the real world, and he finds out, and I shit you not, Ken discovers that the real world has not implemented the patriarchy correctly. Because Ken can't just like waltz into any company and get a job just for being a man. He can't just waltz right into a hospital without, being a doc and getting a job without being a doctor. Ken actually comes to the conclusion that the real world has not implemented patriarchy correctly. Like they had like the right idea of like men being in charge, but they implemented it wrong because he couldn't get anything he wanted just by being a man. And so he comes to that conclusion that they like it's kind of like the argument of like real socialism has never been tried. That was exactly what I was thinking in my head. This is like in Ken's head, this is like the real patriarchy has never been tried. And so Ken's like, "You know what? Since they screwed up the patriarchy in the real world, I'm going to go back to Barbie land and I'm going to implement the patriarchy correctly." That's why he goes back to Barbie land, because the patriarchy in the real world doesn't work. So he goes back to Barbie land and he explains the patriarchy to all the men. And then the men come in because the women are not paying attention. And the men come in and they take over all the women's dream homes. And they redecorate all of the women's dream homes to like have man things and like horses and beers and stuff like that. And they convince the women to like serve them beers on the beach or whatever, and to basically look after them like Ken felt like he should have been in the real world. Oh, and I joke in the middle of it. Oh my god, hang on. Jesus. So because the women have never lived in a world before where like people weren't just nice to each other and did things for each other. The women were like, "Yeah, Ken, we don't mind doing this." It was like their defenses were down. They didn't know that the Kens were trying to rule them, because I don't think the women actually ever consciously tried to rule the Kens. It was just like, this is Barbie land. This is what we do here. This is the whole purpose of this thing. So the Kens got the women to like bring them beers and do that sort of stuff, and they created their own patriarchal society. Well, Barbie comes back, and of course, the whole society is a mess. Men have it's basically like the difference between like a men's bathroom and a woman's bathroom, right? Men have created messes everywhere. Men have redecorated and have horrible taste. And it's like, and you know what the thing is there was actually something sweet about it, because all the men really all they wanted, all the Kens wanted, was to have Barbie's attention. That was it. None of them cared. They didn't really. I mean, you find this out as like the movie plays out. Ken didn't really want to be in charge. Like the men didn't really want to be in charge. They just wanted attention from the Barbies. That was all it was about. And so the women, because they knew that the Kens just wanted attention from them, used that to distract the Kens, to get them to fight each other so that the women could go and fix everything that the men had broken. Which is exactly something that would happen if you were playing a game with Barbies. And again, like you guys, anyone who played with toys growing up understands what this is. This is like this is kind of like if you had a day where like maybe it was raining outside or something, and so everyone's kind of like stuck in, maybe this is just my childhood. Like everyone, it's raining outside, and so I'm over at my cousin's house, and when I was at my cousin's house, because my grandmother babysat us like at all the kids in the family at my cousin's house, and we all went down to the basement. Okay, because the basement was just where we hung out. It was where the TV was. It was where the fucking Barbies and the Dream Hosts were. It was where the GI Joes were. All the toys were in the basement. All right. So it's one of those rainy days, and you have the female cousins and the male cousins all stuck in the basement together, and there's Barbies on one side and there's GI Joes on the other side, and you have like a fucking war. You play a game. That's what this movie was. Like, I don't know how better to explain this. This movie was just make believe. It was, if anything, it was making fun of the idea of the patriarchy, because literally Ken didn't believe that the real world had actually implemented the patriarchy correctly. And then when he tried to implement it, he was easily overthrown because he didn't actually really care about it. And the Barbies at the end decided to treat the Kens better than they were, because they understood that Kens have feelings too, and you got to treat them better than how you've been treating them, because they're ultimately like good guys that literally just wanted Barbie's attention. That was all it was. So, the moral of the story on this one is that, and so going back to what I said at the beginning of being like, I'm not I'm not angry, conservatives. I'm just really disappointed. This is a movie that conservatives should have lifted up. This is a movie that glorifies femininity, even if Barbie has a job outside the home, even if Barbie is president or an astronaut or a lawyer or a doctor or a scientist or some sort of leadership Barbie. Barbie glorified femininity in this movie. Like, the star of the movie is the classic stereotypical Barbie archetype. Conservatives should have loved that. Conservatives should have loved that this movie was clearly and obviously making fun of the idea of the patriarchy, because it quite literally said at the end of the movie, the patriarchy is a made up concept. Barbie is a made up concept. The patriarchy is a made up concept. Like, it could not have been more clear. And the fact that Ben Shapiro, like, completely just like spaced on that, like, Ben Shapiro actually complained about the conversation, because the whole context of this is like, so Barbie had to like escape from the Mattel CEOs, and Barbie ended up in the office of like the ghost of the creator of Barbie, and they had a nice cup of tea and they had a conversation, and the creator of Barbie like showed her how to get out of the building, right? Well, later in the movie, the creator of Barbie comes back to explain. She's like, I didn't look like Barbie. Barbie wasn't supposed to look like me. Barbie wasn't supposed to look like anyone except for Barbie. Like, and she also, I mean, like, and so the context of this is like, Barbie has decided she wants to be in the real world now, so she's walking into the real world with the creator, where all Barbie has to do to go to the real world is decide, because it's make believe, you make it up. So she's going to the real world with the creator, and the creator literally says to her, the woman who Ben Shapiro was like, they just brought this woman in for nostalgia. The creator literally says to Barbie, the patriarchy is a made up concept, just like Barbie. Like, these things are in our heads. So if we want to change, if we want to do something differently, all we need to do is decide to do it differently. Like, this is an empowering message. Like, you can be whatever you want to be. All of these things that society tells you are real, all of these made up ideas, these made up rules that tell you how to live and how to show up in the world, you get to decide how you show up in the world. It was blasting the idea of a patriarchy in the face. And so, conservatives, you really need to not be so triggered by a single effing word, and actually listen to the context of it, because this movie is like, honestly, one of the most wholesome movies that I've seen in a really effing long time. We're going to talk more about it in a second. Nick said, saw it with my daughter, was more entertaining than I thought. My daughter liked it, and I related to the mother-daughter interactions because I had the same interactions with my daughters in my life. Isn't that funny? Isn't that funny? Thank you for the super chat, Nick, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. I really did enjoy this movie. There were many times that I laughed out loud. It was funny. It really was. And I'm like, I'm not this is like not normally my type of movie, but it like there were like good like legitimate LOL moments in this movie. Vince says, I think you just encapsulated why conservatives don't like the movie in general. Barbie is ultra feminine. She's not a feminist. This is not true. Barbie is not a feminist. Like, men think that Barbie is a feminist because, and this is the other point I wanted to make. So, Vince, I'm glad you brought this up. Here's why I'm really disappointed in conservatives. Because conservatives are appropriating the word woke to mean anything that is not conservative Christian values. Barbie is not a feminist. Barbie does not hate men. Barbie just prefers hanging out with women. That's it. They have the whole point of Barbie is girls playing together, doing girl things in girl spaces. It is not a feminist movie. It is not shitting on men. There is no point in the movie where Barbie is shitting on men. Barbie just prefers to hang out with women because that is what the game is. And there's nothing wrong with that, guys. There's nothing woke about that. We're talking about young girls playing with dolls with other young girls. It is a game meant for girls. It is a girls' space. Boys have G.I. Joes or He-Man or superheroes or any of those things. You guys don't understand. The only really far-ranging toy that was specifically targeted towards women or girls, I guess, when I was growing up was Barbie. When you went into a toy store when I was growing up, there were aisles of G.I. Joes. There were aisles of fucking Star Wars and models and like models that you put together like cars and things. There were aisles of like superhero stuff. There was one aisle for girls growing up, and most of that aisle was taken up with Barbie. Barbie was the toys that girls had when they wanted to be girls. And there were other things, like there were My Little Ponies running around. Hang on. There were My Little Ponies running around. There were My Little Ponies, there were Care Bears, there were Cabbage Patch Kids, but you got to admit that those toys were mostly in like the stuffed animal aisle, which was basically kind of like a mixed gendered aisle of toys. There was one aisle that was like so pink and had all the fucking accessories, and you like that there was one aisle that girls spent the time in, and that was Barbie, okay? My point is with this is that the fact that conservatives are like believe that Barbie was shitting on men, no. Barbie was not shitting on Ken. Barbie at the end said they should be treating the Kens better. Maybe it's not as though they don't think Ken is bad. They just prefer hanging out with the other Barbies. That's it. People are allowed to have preferences. I, in real life, generally prefer hanging out with men than I do with women. That's not to say I won't hang out with women every once in a while. I do have things that I do with groups of women, but I just generally prefer hanging out with men because I tend to get along better with men than I do with women. Some men prefer to hang out, like gay men mostly, prefer to hang out with women than they do with men. Some men prefer to hang out with other men and have guys' nights. Some women prefer to hang out with other women and drink wine on the weekends. Just because you prefer to hang out with women and spend time with women and do women things does not mean you're a feminist. It just means that you prefer hanging out with women. I don't know how to explain this any better. So, Yeah, like, so that idea is garbage. The other thing I'm gonna like, so Barbie also at the end of the movie encourages Ken to find himself. Now, here's the thing. It is not Barbie's fault that Ken has built his identity around being with Barbie. Okay? Barbie didn't ask Ken to build. Basically, Ken is very codependent in the movie. And I think women can attest to this. When men are codependent, it's kind of annoying. I mean, and I bet men can attest this too. Like, I'm sure when women are codependent with men, it's kind of annoying sometimes. Sometimes it's all right. Sometimes it's nice. And then sometimes it gets annoying and you want them to go home because you want to be able to do things without them. I was texting with someone a couple weeks ago. Hang on. I was texting with someone a couple weeks ago that was, it was a guy that was complaining about like girls like in his life and how he like was like less than impressed with like girls in his life, and he said like they don't want you to go have fun, they don't want you to go have fun without them, like they're always clingy, they always want to know what you're doing, like that's annoying, right? So in the Barbie movie, that was Ken to Barbie. So of course, like Ben Shapiro was like, "Well, Barbie's just annoyed by Ken. She doesn't even like Ken." Well, no, Ken was being annoying to Barbie. And the reason that Ken was being annoying to Barbie is that Ken did not have his own sense of identity separately than Barbie. So it's not as though Barbie was shitting on him. In fact, Barbie at the end of the movie gave Ken really, 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 really sound advice, which is, Ken, you need to go and find yourself. This whole movie is basically about Barbie going through an existential crisis because the woman who was playing with Barbie in the real world was also going through an existential crisis, which I'm sorry happens when you reach a certain age and you get nostalgic about things and you're like, oh, reminiscing back to your childhood about how simpler things were. So the woman in the real world is going through the existential crisis. So because she's going through that crisis and she's playing with the Barbies as she's going through that crisis, Barbie goes through the same existential crisis. So throughout the movie, you watch Barbie have her own journey. Barbie evolves and grows and finds out more about herself through the course of the movie. At the end of the movie, after they have defeated the Kens, after the Barbies have reclaimed Barbie World, Ken and her have a conversation in which Ken flat out says, he's like, I didn't even like leading Barbie World. I just liked horses. Like, I don't really know what that means, but okay. And Barbie says to Ken, Ken, you need to go and find yourself. You need to find yourself separate from me. It's not as though Barbie was like breaking up with Ken because they didn't break up, but it was like we need to exist as individuals and you need to have your own identity. Guys, the fact that conservatives think this is an example of feminism or woke is one of the most ridiculous things that I've ever heard in my life, because everyone's goal should be to stand on their own 2 feet as an individual and to find themselves as an individual. And that is exactly what Barbie told Ken to do. It is not feminist to do that. Now, if Barbie had told Ken, Ken, this is what you need to do in the world, and you need to know your place, and you need to do this, that, and the other thing, and don't disrupt what the women are doing, Ken. Okay, well, that might have been a little feminist, but this movie was not feminist. This was simply just two adults having a conversation about, like, I've been on a little bit of a journey here. I think that you could benefit from going on a similar journey, and, we can exist together. We can hang out. We can still play together in whatever manner they define play, all right? But there's no sex in Barbie Land, though. But like you need to go and be your own person, and that's actually really good advice. That is the opposite of woke. Like the fact that the moral of the story is can you need to be your own person is the opposite of feminism. I'm sorry. Like it's so stupid. Rottweiler says Barbie wasn't feminist. It was about giving girls a power fantasy without being political. The late second wave feminists and the and third wave feminists. Well, this is my other point. It's like going back to the idea that conservatives are redefining the term woke to mean anything that doesn't adhere to conservative Christian values. Like, guys, it is not feminist, it is not woke for a woman to enjoy being a woman, to enjoy spending time with other women, to enjoy having a job outside the home, to enjoy having a life outside the home. It is not woke if a woman does not want to have kids. It is not woke if a woman doesn't want to get married when she's in her early 20s. It is not woke for a woman to have a job. These are all aspects of individualism. Some women are not going to want to have kids. I don't want to have kids. I like my money and I like my freedom. I don't want to. That doesn't mean I'm a woke feminist. Some women are going to want to have jobs outside the home and some women aren't. And the movie actually says that. The movie at the end was like, can we just have like a normal Barbie? And maybe she has kids and maybe she doesn't. And maybe she's a mom because that's a good thing to be. And maybe she decides not to be. The end of the movie was like, can we create the least political form of Barbie ever that's just like a woman in the world? Like, would that be pretty great? And Mattel was like, yes, we can do that. Yes, we can. Conservatives are calling it woke because they're triggered by the word patriarchy. They're annoyed that they perceived it to be like, I don't even know. The fact that conservatives consider this to be woke is really effing disturbing to me because it says that something has gone horribly, horribly, horribly wrong. I'm going to tell you this too. Ben Shapiro in his review said that the reason that this movie was targeted towards young girls is because of the previews. The previews are how you know, because I went to the movie and all I saw were previews for movies for kids. Well, I'll tell you what, I just went to see the movie. Do you know what previews I saw in the movie? Number one, I saw The Hunger Games, this new Hunger Games prequel that's coming out, which, by the way, this movie looks awesome. Actually, every movie I saw a preview for looked actually pretty good. Like this new Hunger Games movie that's coming out, I fucking love The Hunger Games. It looks so cool. It's like a prequel where President Snow is like a coach on the Hunger Games at the 10th Hunger Games. And it's just like, it looks really, 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 really good. And I'm really excited about it. But that's not a movie for kids. The Hunger Games is a movie for adults. So that wasn't targeted at kids. The second preview that I saw was for this movie. I think it's called The Challengers. It has Zendaya in it. And this is probably like the only thing I've ever seen Zendaya in that I don't think she would annoy the ever loving hell out of me. Because so is this movie about this woman tennis player, and there are two men, and apparently they have like a threesome or something, and they're both competing for her attention. And then like years later, there's an injury. It's like a movie about like the relationships between these three people, I think, and then there's tennis involved and stuff like that. That movie looked great too. I want to see it. I still don't think that was a preview for kids. And then the next preview that was on the movie was for Gran Turismo, which is about like video game stars who learn to drive race cars in real life. I mean, I suppose you could make the argument that maybe that's for like teenagers, but it was not for kids. So none of the previews that I saw in this movie were targeted at kids. So Ben Shapiro's theory that this is a movie that was obviously and clearly targeted at young girls, like based on the previews that he saw when he saw the movie, just goes completely out the window because I saw completely different previews. So I don't know how they picked the previews or why Ben Shapiro thinks that's an indication of anything, but he is obviously and clearly wrong.